The phone never rings gently in a prison. It arrives without warmth, without warning, and without patience. A sharp, piercing sound cuts through the air, announcing not just a connection, but a countdown. Somewhere beyond concrete walls and locked steel doors, a family member hears that ring and freezes. They already know what it means. Time has begun moving faster than normal, and nothing they say will slow it down. For the inmate, the moment before the call is often the hardest. He stands in line, surrounded by noise that feels distant, rehearsing sentences he has practiced 100 times in his head. He has written notes on scrap paper. He has crossed things out. He has decided what can be said and what must be buried. There is no room for hesitation. There is no space for emotional wandering. Every single word must earn its place. When the call finally connects, voices meet across a gap that can't be measured in miles alone. The sound quality is thin, distorted, but unmistakably familiar. For a brief moment, reality softens. Two lives touch through a wire. For pregnant partners on the outside, this moment is a mix of relief and dread. Relief because they get to hear his voice. Dread because they know how quickly it will be taken away again. Many women describe holding the phone with both hands, as if their physical grip could somehow anchor the call in place. Some pace the room, step after step, trying to walk off the anxiety. Others sit completely still, afraid that even the slightest movement might break the fragile connection. The conversation begins carefully. How are you feeling? Did you eat today? How was the night? These questions sound ordinary, but they are loaded with meaning. Each one carries a universe of concern, guilt, and longing. And each answer is filtered. Pain is softened. Fear is edited out. Both sides are performing a kind of emotional restraint, not because they want to, but because the system demands it. For death row inmates, the call carries a heavier silence beneath the words. There is an unspoken awareness that hangs over every sentence. Time isn't just limited by the phone system. It's limited by something far more final. Every conversation exists under the shadow of profound uncertainty. Even when execution dates are not mentioned, they are present, felt in the pauses, in the changes in tone, in the way certain topics are avoided entirely. Many death row inmates speak slower during calls, not because they have more time, but because they are trying to stretch the moment emotionally, if not physically. Some focus on listening rather than speaking, memorizing the sound of breathing on the other end of the line. Others fill the silence quickly, afraid that quiet will invite thoughts they are desperately trying to keep away. When the partner mentions the pregnancy, the air changes. The word itself feels heavier than it should. New life spoken into a space defined by confinement and endings. She talks about cravings, doctor visits, and small changes that feel monumental to her. He listens, eyes closed, building images in his mind that he knows he may never see, memories he may never physically hold. He asks questions, careful not to sound desperate. She answers, careful not to sound afraid. Neither of them says what they are really thinking. He does not say how utterly powerless he feels, trapped and unable to be there for her. She does not say how overwhelmingly alone the nights are, because there is no time for the truth in its full, raw form. And then it happens. A cold, mechanical voice interrupts the human one. You have 5 minutes remaining. The effect is immediate. Voices tighten. Words speed up. The emotional temperature skyrockets. What was once a conversation becomes compression. Entire feelings are forced into single sentences. Laughter feels rushed. Silence becomes dangerous. This automated warning is not neutral. It is a psychological trigger. It reminds both parties that control belongs to someone else. It reinforces a brutal hierarchy. The system always speaks louder than love. For families, this moment is often when the tears begin, sometimes silently, sometimes uncontrollably. Many pregnant partners turn their faces away from others in the room, embarrassed by a vulnerability they did not choose. Some force a smile into their voices, trying to protect the man on the other end from more worry. Others go quiet, overwhelmed by the impossible pressure of choosing what matters most to say in these fleeting seconds. Inside the prison, the inmate feels that familiar weight settle into his chest. He knows what's coming next. He has lived this ending 1,000 times before. He chooses his final words with extreme care. He might say, "Stay strong," instead of, "I'm so scared." He might say, "I love you," instead of, "I don't know what's going to happen to us." He might say nothing at all, just listening, because listening feels like holding on. For death row inmates, this part of the call is often the most painful. The knowledge that these few minutes could one day be remembered as their last changes everything. Some men begin giving subtle instructions, practical things disguised as casual remarks. Others avoid the future completely, anchoring themselves in the present moment as if it's the only safe place left in the world. When the final warning comes, 1 minute remaining, panic sets in. Time fractures. Words overlap. Apologies surface too late. Promises feel fragile. Some partners begin speaking faster than they can think, desperate to empty their hearts before the silence arrives. Others stop speaking altogether, unable to face the inevitable ending. And then, without ceremony, without softness, the line goes dead. No goodbye, no final breath shared, just disconnection. On the outside, the partner stares at the phone long after it has stopped responding. The room feels larger, emptier. The pregnancy feels heavier. The silence that follows is not peaceful. It is sharp and all-consuming. Many women replay the conversation immediately, analyzing what they said, what they didn't say, what they wish they could take back or add. Inside the prison, the inmate returns the receiver slowly. The noise of the facility rushes back in, loud and unforgiving. The emotional bubble bursts. He is alone again, carrying words that had no place to land. This is not just a phone call. It is a controlled emotional exchange, designed to end abruptly. It is a system that allows connection only in measured doses, ensuring that love never feels complete. It is a constant reminder that even voices are borrowed privileges here. And for families, especially those waiting for a child, especially those tied to death row, this call becomes a ritual of endurance. A moment they both crave and fear. A moment that leaves them emotionally open, only to be closed again without warning. This is where their story begins. Because once the call ends, the real psychological impact starts to unfold. Pregnancy is a time when presence matters more than words. It's meant to be shared in small, ordinary moments. The quiet drive to a clinic, the sound of a heartbeat amplified through a monitor, the gentle reassurance of a hand placed where new life moves. But when incarceration stands between two people, pregnancy becomes something else entirely. It becomes a story told in fragments, relayed through a phone line that doesn't allow pauses for emotion. For the pregnant partners of inmates, each day carries a profound contradiction. Life is growing, expanding, demanding attention and care. At the same time, absence is constant, heavy, and unchanging. There's no physical support during moments of fear, no shared silence after difficult news, no embrace when anxiety peaks in the middle of the night. Everything must be translated into words and delivered under a strict time limit. These precious phone calls become the only space where pregnancy is acknowledged as real by both parents. Many women prepare for these calls with incredible intention. They write down notes. They decide what updates matter most. They measure how much emotion they can afford to express without breaking down. Some practice speaking calmly, even when their bodies are exhausted and their minds are overwhelmed. When the call finally connects, pregnancy is often introduced carefully, almost cautiously. The baby moved today. The doctor says everything looks okay. These sentences are chosen not just to inform, but to protect. They are shaped to avoid causing fear or guilt. Complications, pain, and uncertainty are frequently left out, not because they don't exist, but because there is no space to hold the inmate's reaction. On the other end of the line, incarcerated fathers listen with intense focus. They memorize details. They ask questions they know cannot replace presence. How often is the baby moving? What time are the appointments? Are you resting enough? These questions are desperate attempts to participate in a process they have been physically excluded from. For many inmates, pregnancy intensifies feelings of helplessness. They know their partner is carrying both the child and the weight of responsibility alone. They know they cannot intervene if something goes wrong. This awareness creates a deep internal conflict, joy tied tightly to fear, hope bound to frustration. For death row inmates, the emotional tension is even more severe. Pregnancy represents continuation, a future, a possibility, concepts that feel painfully out of reach. Some of these men struggle to engage fully with discussions about the pregnancy, not because they don't care, but because caring hurts too much. Others cling to these conversations as proof that they still matter, that their existence has meaning beyond confinement. There is a unique pain in imagining a child you may never meet. Some death row inmates ask their partners to describe everything in painstaking detail. The way the baby kicks, the shape of the stomach, the reactions of strangers. They build a mental image that feels vivid yet unbearably fragile. Others avoid these details altogether, afraid that forming too clear a picture will make the inevitable loss even harder to bear. For pregnant partners, carrying a child connected to an incarcerated or condemned man creates an isolation few people can understand. Social support is often limited. Many women face judgment, silence, or awkward distance from friends and family. They attend appointments alone. They make decisions alone. They grieve alone, even while life continues to grow inside them. Phone calls are expected to fill this emotional gap, but they simply cannot. The constraints of time and constant monitoring shape every single exchange. Emotional honesty is a luxury when seconds are scarce. Tears consume time. Silence wastes it. Every moment spent processing emotion is a moment stolen from communication. As a result, many couples develop an unnatural communication style. Conversations become transactional. Information replaces feeling. Updates replace reassurance. Love is compressed into repetition. "I love you," said again and again, because it is the one sentence that feels essential enough to justify its space. Yet even love feels incomplete when it cannot be accompanied by touch. When pregnancy complications arise, the emotional strain intensifies. Many women delay sharing bad news until they can find the right words, the right tone, the right moment. Some wait for days, even weeks, fearing the impact of distressing information delivered without the ability to comfort or be comforted. For inmates, learning about complications through a phone call can be devastating. The inability to act creates a sense of paralysis. They are forced into a passive role at a time when their every instinct demands action. This powerlessness often manifests as guilt, anger, or emotional withdrawal. Death row inmates face an added psychological burden, the question of legacy. Some wonder whether their child will know them only through stories. Others question whether forming a bond is fair to a child who may grow up without them. These thoughts are rarely spoken aloud. They live quietly beneath the surface of every conversation. As the pregnancy progresses, time becomes a cruel companion. Each passing week brings the child closer, while the inmate remains fixed in place. The contrast is stark. Life advances on the outside. Inside, it remains suspended. The phone calls begin to revolve around preparation. Names are discussed. Practical matters are mentioned indirectly. There is a careful avoidance of long-term planning, especially for death row families. The future is referenced vaguely, if at all. No one wants to acknowledge what might not be possible. When the automated warning interrupts these conversations, it often cuts right through moments of vulnerability. A partner might be describing a sudden pain. An inmate might be offering reassurance. The interruption does not wait. It does not soften its tone. It reminds both parties that their emotional processes must conform to institutional schedules. After the call ends, pregnant partners are left to sit with what was shared and what was withheld. Many experience a kind of emotional whiplash, momentary connection followed by abrupt loss. Hormonal changes intensify these feelings, making recovery from each call more difficult. Inside the prison, the inmate returns to his routine, carrying images of a life continuing without him. The knowledge that a child is growing while he remains confined can feel both motivating and crushing. Hope and despair coexist, with neither fully winning. Pregnancy behind glass and wire is not just about distance. It's about fragmentation. Moments that should form a continuous story are broken into disconnected updates. Emotional bonds are stretched thin, forced to survive on sound alone. And as the due date approaches, a new fear emerges. One that no phone call, no matter how carefully planned, can prepare them for. Because soon, the conversation will no longer be about pregnancy. It will be about arrival. This is a reality that exists in the shadows of our society, a silent struggle of love, loss, and hope against impossible odds. By the time a family gets used to prison phone calls, something inside them has already changed. The mind adapts, but the heart never really does. What starts as shock slowly hardens into routine, and it's in that routine where the deepest damage hides. The calls are no longer unexpected interruptions. They become scheduled emotional events. You anticipate them, you prepare for them, and you start mourning them before they even begin. Prison phone calls aren't designed for comfort. They're designed for control. Every single part of the system reinforces this. Calls are monitored. Time is restricted. Warnings are automated. Disconnection is abrupt. There is absolutely no room for emotional completion. The structure itself guarantees that no conversation ever feels finished. This isn't an accident. It's policy. It's shaped by logistics, security, and in many places, by money. But no matter the reason, the psychological result is the same. Short calls force people to compress their humanity. Families learn fast that there's no space for emotional wandering. You can't start a story unless you know exactly how it ends. You can't cry freely. You can't just sit in silence together. Silence costs seconds, and seconds are currency. Every pause is a gamble. So, conversations become strategic. The partner on the outside plans their emotional delivery. They prioritize information over expression. They rehearse what they're going to say, often choosing clarity over honesty. Feelings that need time to explain, like fear, resentment, or just pure exhaustion, are postponed forever. They're just too big for the time allowed. Inside the prison, the inmates feel this pressure intensely. Many talk about the mental countdown that starts the second the call connects. They track the time instinctively, changing their tone and what they say as the end gets closer. The first few minutes are for updates. The middle minutes are for reassurance. The final seconds are for love. The system trains them to think this way. For people on death row, this structure carries an even heavier weight. Short calls mirror a larger truth. Everything is limited. It's not just time on the phone, but time itself. Every forced ending reinforces a sense of finality that goes way beyond the call. It becomes symbolic. The line disconnects, and the reminder settles in. Control is temporary, permission is conditional. Families experience this as repeated emotional interruption. Just when the connection starts to feel real, it's severed. Over time, this pattern creates a state of emotional hypervigilance. Many partners report feeling intense anxiety as the call goes on, especially when the automated warnings begin. The body reacts before the mind can even process it. Heart rate increases. Breathing changes. Muscles tense up. That automated voice is particularly damaging. It's impersonal, mechanical, and completely indifferent. It doesn't adjust for emotion. It doesn't pause for tears. It doesn't care if you were in the middle of a sentence. Its only job is to assert authority and end the connection right on schedule. For pregnant partners, these interruptions are especially distressing. Pregnancy already heightens emotional sensitivity. When you combine that with an abrupt disconnection, the result can be overwhelming. Many women describe feeling emotionally cut open when the call ends, left exposed with no immediate way to recover. Some just sit in silence afterward, replaying the conversation in their minds. Others quickly distract themselves, afraid that thinking about it will trigger tears. Few feel relief when the call is over. Most just feel loss. The inmates go back to their routines carrying the unfinished weight of that conversation. There's no debriefing, no space to process. Emotions have to be contained immediately to survive the environment. Vulnerability is dangerous inside, so feelings get suppressed, compartmentalized, and delayed. Over time, this suppression becomes a habit. Short calls also reshape how people express love. Affection becomes repetitive and simplified. "I love you" is said over and over, not because it means less, but because it's safe. It doesn't need an explanation. It fits within the time limit. It survives being cut off. More complex expressions, fear for the future, regret over the past, a deep longing for presence, are often left unspoken. Not because they aren't important, but because they are too big to risk being cut off mid-sentence. This creates a pattern of emotional incompletion. Conversations end without resolution. Topics are left open. Questions linger. The mind looks for a closure that never comes. For families of those on death row, this lack of closure is especially damaging. Every call carries the knowledge that there might not be another chance to finish what was started. This adds a sense of urgency, but also restraint. Some families avoid difficult topics completely, choosing comfort over honesty, familiarity over truth. The system encourages this. It rewards emotional efficiency, not depth. As time passes, families start to normalize the abnormal. They accept the countdown. They anticipate the interruption. They adjust their expectations downward. This adaptation is often mistaken for resilience. In reality, it's survival through emotional narrowing. Psychologists call this constrained attachment, forming a bond under conditions that limit expression and continuity. The bond is there, but it's shaped by restriction. It carries tension. It's always a little bit incomplete. For children born into these circumstances, the effects ripple outward. Parents form an attachment through sound rather than presence. Familiarity is built through voices instead of touch. The very foundation of connection is fragmented from the very beginning. Short calls don't just limit conversation. They alter emotional development. The final seconds of each call are the most revealing. Voices change. Words stumble. Some partners rush through their final thoughts. Others freeze, unable to face the ending. Many say goodbye multiple times, as if repeating it might delay the disconnection. But the system doesn't wait. The call ends on schedule, regardless of whether you're ready. And in that moment, the emotional reality becomes crystal clear. Connection is permitted, but only briefly. Love is allowed, but only under supervision. Goodbyes are enforced, not chosen. This is the system of short goodbyes. And with each enforced ending, the emotional cost builds up quietly, steadily, and invisibly, setting the stage for something deeper and more lasting than just sadness. Because what follows these repeated interruptions isn't just pain, it's trauma. Thank you for listening. If this story resonated with you, please consider sharing it. Awareness is the first step toward change. Subscribe for more stories that need to be heard. When the call ends, the damage doesn't stop. In many ways, it only begins. The silence that follows a prison phone call isn't empty. It's heavy, filled with unspoken words and unresolved emotions. For families and loved ones, especially pregnant partners and those connected to death row inmates, this silence becomes a recurring psychological space, one they are forced to enter again and again. On the outside, the body reacts before the mind can even process what just happened. Hands might shake. Breathing feels shallow. The sudden absence of a familiar voice creates a jarring emotional drop, something like withdrawal. Many partners describe feeling disoriented for minutes, even hours, after a call ends, as if they've been abruptly pulled out of another reality and dropped back into their own. Pregnant partners are especially vulnerable in this aftermath. The hormonal changes of pregnancy can intensify every emotional response, making recovery from each call that much harder. Some women report crying without fully understanding why. Others feel emotionally numb, disconnected from their surroundings, or overwhelmed by a sudden, physical sense of loneliness. The pregnancy itself becomes intertwined with the emotional rhythm of these calls. Good news shared during a call might bring a moment of temporary relief, only to be followed by a profound sadness once the connection is severed. And bad news, shared too quickly, can linger for days without any comfort or resolution. Either way, the emotional impact doesn't just fade away. Many partners find themselves replaying conversations over and over in their minds. They analyze every tone, every word choice, every pause. They wonder, did I say the right thing? Did I sound strong enough? Did I hide too much or reveal too little? This mental replay isn't intentional. It is a desperate search for the closure that the call itself could never provide. Inside the prison, the emotional aftermath takes a different, but equally damaging form. Inmates are expected to return immediately to the prison routine. There's no transition period, no moment to decompress, no acknowledgement of the emotional strain. Any vulnerability has to be locked away, and fast. The environment simply doesn't allow space for reflection or grief. For incarcerated fathers, especially those awaiting execution, this aftermath can be deeply destabilizing. Hearing about a child growing and changing while remaining physically powerless creates an internal conflict that has nowhere to go. Emotions like guilt, fear, longing, and hope all collide, often leading to an emotional shutdown as a defense mechanism. Some inmates withdraw completely after calls, choosing silence over the risk of feeling too much. Others become restless, unable to focus, replaying the conversation internally while keeping up an outward appearance of control. This emotional dissonance, feeling so much while appearing unaffected, takes a massive long-term psychological toll. For death row inmates, the aftermath is often layered with what's called anticipatory grief. Each call might be unconsciously processed as a potential final interaction. Even when no execution date is set, the awareness of that ultimate uncertainty is always there. The mind prepares for loss repeatedly, even when that loss doesn't immediately arrive. Families on the outside experience a similar, strange form of grief. They are connected to someone who is alive, yet completely inaccessible. They grieve a relationship that exists but can't fully function. This constant state of emotional suspension creates chronic stress. Psychologists call this experience ambiguous loss, a type of grief that has no closure. There's no clear beginning or end. There's no socially recognized moment for mourning. The loss is ongoing, unresolved, and totally invisible to most of the world. For pregnant partners, this ambiguous loss is compounded by societal expectations. Pregnancy is supposed to be a joyful time, but many women carrying children connected to the carceral system experience profound isolation instead. They feel pressure to appear happy while internally managing a storm of fear, sadness, and uncertainty. Their support systems, even with the best intentions, may accidentally minimize their experience. Friends might avoid the topic altogether. Family members may not know what to say. This external silence only reinforces the isolation, leaving those brief, structured phone calls as the primary emotional outlet, even though the calls themselves are inherently limited and often painful. Over time, these repeated emotional aftermaths begin to shape behavior. Some partners learn to emotionally detach to protect themselves from the constant cycle of hope and disappointment. Others become hyper-focused on the calls, organizing their entire lives around them, allowing their emotional stability to rise and fall with each interaction. Neither of these responses is without its cost, and the children born into these circumstances are affected, indirectly but profoundly. We know that significant emotional stress during pregnancy can be linked to long-term developmental outcomes. While every situation is unique, the cumulative stress experienced by the mother becomes a part of the child's very first environment before they even enter the world. Inside the prison walls, inmates carry their own aftermath quietly. There is often no one to talk to, no opportunity to process emotions with peers. In that environment, expressing vulnerability can be seen as a dangerous weakness. As a result, feelings are pushed down and internalized, sometimes surfacing later as depression, anxiety, or a complete emotional numbness. For those on death row, the emotional aftermath can include a profound and isolating existential reflection. Questions arise that have no easy answers. What does it mean to help bring a new life into the world when your own future is so uncertain? How do you remain emotionally present for your loved ones without causing them even more pain? These questions are rarely spoken aloud, but they shape every interaction, every decision, and the emotional distance that often grows over time. The phone call, an instrument meant to provide connection, ironically becomes a psychological trigger. Some families report feeling intense anxiety in the hours leading up to a call, not because they don't want to talk, but because they are already bracing for the emotional crash that will follow. The mind begins to associate connection with pain, creating an internal conflict that is incredibly difficult to resolve. And yet, despite all the damage, the calls continue. They continue because hope, even a painful and fractured hope, is often preferable to absolute silence. They continue because hearing a voice, even for a few minutes, reminds both people that they still exist to one another. Because love, even when it's constrained, monitored, and fragmented, still finds a way to surface. But each call leaves its mark. Over weeks, months, and years, these marks accumulate. Emotional resilience is tested again and again. Coping mechanisms evolve. Some people grow quieter. Others grow more intense. Relationships adapt in ways that would never be necessary outside of the shadow of incarceration. This is the emotional aftermath that no one prepares families for. It's not dramatic in a single moment. It's slow, it's repetitive, and it's deeply internal. It reshapes identity, attachment, and expectations. It teaches people how to live with unfinished conversations and unresolved feelings. And as time moves forward, toward a birth, toward a sentencing outcome, toward an uncertain future, the emotional weight carried by these families doesn't just disappear. It settles. It becomes a part of them, preparing them, whether they realize it or not, for the most difficult silence of all, Thank you for watching and for taking the time to understand this hidden reality. If this story resonated with you, please consider sharing it. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that need to be heard. There's a moment some families learn to recognize, even if they can't quite explain it. It's a phone call that feels different from all the others. Nothing obvious is said. No big announcements are made. Yet, you can feel it. Something in the tone changes. Voices slow down. The pauses between words stretch just a little longer than usual. Every word seems chosen with such care, as if it has to justify its own existence. This is when the line, the connection itself, begins to feel fragile. For the families of incarcerated men, especially those connected to death row, this kind of call carries a quiet gravity. It's a weight you can feel through the receiver. Conversations often turn reflective, looking back on shared memories. Questions become gentler, softer. Laughter, if it appears at all, feels cautious, almost like it's borrowed time. No one wants to rush the moment, yet everyone is painfully aware of time moving forward, without mercy. For pregnant partners, these calls often take on this weight as a birth approaches. The body is changing so rapidly. Fear and anticipation live side by side. There's this incredible excitement about finally meeting the child, but it's mixed with a profound grief over the absence that will hang over that very moment. The partner might describe the preparations, the tiny clothes folded and waiting, the sleeping space all arranged, while carefully, almost subconsciously, avoiding language that implies any certainty about a shared future. They'll talk about the baby's room, not our nursery. And on the other end of the line, the inmate listens. He listens with an intensity that's hard to describe. Every single detail feels significant, monumental. He memorizes them. He builds a picture of the space in his mind. He imagines the child. For men on death row, this act of imagination is both a comfort and a form of torment. It allows them an emotional presence, a way to be there in spirit, while at the same time, it highlights with brutal clarity what may never be physically possible. Often, the conversation circles back to familiar ground. Memories are revisited. Old inside jokes resurface, maybe a little quieter this time. Stories that have been told 100 times are told again. This isn't because there's nothing new to say. It's because familiarity feels safer than the vast, terrifying uncertainty of the future. These repetitions aren't meaningless. They are lifelines. They re-attempts to anchor the relationship in some kind of continuity when everything else feels like it's about to break apart. As the call continues, the automated warnings cut in, just like they always do. You have 5 minutes remaining. But this time, they feel heavier. Each interruption, each sterile announcement, lands differently. The mechanical voice feels louder, more intrusive than before. It slices through moments that feel important, even sacred. The families know the routine. They know the countdown by heart. But knowing doesn't soften the impact. It never does. When the final minute approaches, you can feel another shift. Some partners start speaking faster, a rush of words trying to release everything at once before the line goes dead. Others do the opposite. They slow down, savoring each syllable, each shared breath. And then there's silence. Not an empty silence, but one that is full of everything that can't be said. Sometimes, in that last minute, nothing is said at all. The shared quiet becomes the most meaningful part of the entire call. Goodbyes are rarely straightforward. They're layered with meanings that are too heavy to speak aloud. Take care becomes, I don't know what happens next, and I'm scared. Stay strong becomes, I wish I could be there to protect you from this. And I love you, has to carry the weight of everything else. For families connected to death row, these final moments are especially complex. Even when an execution isn't imminent, the awareness of that possibility always lingers in the background. Every goodbye carries that weight. Every ending feels both provisional, like a see you later, and terrifyingly final, all at the same time. And then, without emotion, without any acknowledgement of the profound human moment that just occurred, the line disconnects. There is no signal that this call mattered more than any other. No pause, no recognition. The system that controls the call doesn't distinguish between an ordinary conversation and one that is heavy with life, death, and love. The call ends, exactly as scheduled. On the outside, the silence is instantaneous and absolute. The partner remains still, phone still in hand, as if any small movement might somehow undo what just happened. The world outside the window feels briefly unreal. The sounds of traffic, of life going on, feel distant. Time seems to slow down. For a pregnant partner, this sudden silence can trigger a flood of emotion. Tears might come suddenly, or not at all, leaving a strange numbness. Some feel a strange sense of relief that the tension of the call is finally over. Others feel an overwhelming sense of loss, even when no concrete loss has actually occurred. The body just responds instinctively, as if it's already preparing for grief. Inside the prison, the inmate replaces the receiver and steps back into the rigid routine of the institution. The transition is immediate and brutal. There is no space, no time, no acknowledgement that something deeply significant has just passed. The environment demands total emotional containment. Whatever was felt during that call, the love, the fear, the hope, it all has to be folded inward, packed down, and carried silently. For a man on death row, this return to reality can be particularly jarring. The contrast between the intimate connection he just felt and the cold, hard reality of his confinement becomes stark and painful. Moments earlier, he was part of a shared emotional world with his family. Now, he is once again defined solely by his number, his cell, his sentence. As time passes, these families begin to recognize a painful truth. Some calls linger longer than others. Certain conversations replay in the mind with a greater intensity. They are remembered not for what was said, but for what was felt. These specific calls become reference points, emotional landmarks in a life defined by separation. They mark transitions: the call before a child's birth, the call after receiving bad news, the call before the uncertainty deepens even further. Long after they end, they continue to shape thoughts, emotions, and expectations. Eventually, for some families, the line does go silent for reasons beyond the automated schedule. Transfers happen, restrictions change, and outcomes are decided. The silence becomes extended, no longer measured in minutes, but in days, weeks, or even permanently. And when that final silence arrives, it doesn't feel sudden. It feels like something that has been approaching slowly, announced quietly by every short, painful goodbye that came before it. Families are left with memories that are shaped by interruption, love expressed in fragments, relationships maintained under constant constraint. They are left with emotional bonds that were forged not through physical presence, but through sheer, unrelenting persistence. For the children born into these circumstances, their story begins in absence. Their earliest connection to one parent exists only through stories, through recordings, through descriptions from their mother. That voice on the phone becomes a symbol long before it can ever become a memory attached to a face or a touch. And yet, despite everything, these calls mattered. They mattered because they preserved a flicker of humanity where systems are designed to impose limits. They mattered because they allowed love to exist, even if only for a few minutes at a time, under the watchful eye of control and surveillance. They mattered because they reminded everyone involved, the person inside and the family outside, that behind the walls, the rules, and the procedures, real lives were still continuing, still loving, still hoping. When the line finally goes silent for good, what remains is not just loss. What remains is the proof that a connection survived, that it fought to exist in a place where it was never meant to thrive. The silence you're feeling now, at the end of this story, is intentional. It's meant to mirror the silence that these families live with every single day. It's an invitation to sit with that discomfort for a moment, rather than quickly resolving it. To reflect, rather than just move on. Because some stories don't end with neat answers. They end with echoes. Thank you for listening.